What a wonderful idea. That's what I told my daughter-in-law, Jessica, when she chirped that all 28 members of her family would be descending upon my ancestral home for Thanksgiving. But, I added, I'll be in Canada. You all just make yourselves at home and get that family feast ready. The smile on her face froze, like it was flash frozen, but what she didn't know was the real drama was just getting started. My name is Susan. I'm 66 years old, and for months I had been watching my family's heritage being sold off, piece by painful piece. It all started when my son, Michael, married a woman who treated memories like they were merchandise. From day one, Jessica decided my home was her personal showroom. Susan, this clock looks a little dated. Susan, this tea set is just collecting dust. Susan, you know, these things could fund a fabulous vacation. If this story touches your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel to listen to more meaningful life stories with us. Your support is our biggest motivation to keep sharing. My library, or as I like to call it, the very heart of this house, has always been my sanctuary. It's a space not measured in square feet, but in the stories stacked high on the dark oak shelves. The air in here has an unmistakable scent, a delicate blend of old paper, worn leather, and the lemon and beeswax polish my late husband, Paul, used to make by hand every autumn. In late October in Vermont, the sunlight takes on the color of thinned honey. It streams through the large bay window, catching tiny dust motes and making them dance like miniature stars in my own quiet universe. This piece was always underscored by a delicate symphony, the steady, rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner, the gentle chime of the French mantel clock on the fireplace, and the soft whir of the brass nautical clock that Paul cherished. They didn't just count time, they breathed. They told the story of generations who had lived and loved under this very roof. I was running my bony fingers along the spine of a leather-bound book, feeling the little cracks of time when that symphony was shattered. The jarring crunch of gravel under the tires of a luxury SUV sliced through the quiet. It was like a scratch on a vinyl record, a wrong note in a perfect harmony. I didn't even have to look. Only one person arrives at this house with such noisy haste: Jessica, my daughter-in-law. The front door opened without a knock. That was her way, a casual claiming of space that I could never quite get used to. The sharp, decisive clicks of her heels echoed on the hardwood floors that my Paul had spent an entire summer sanding and finishing himself. To me, that sound was like the talons of a bird of prey marking its territory. She appeared in the library doorway, a slash of vibrant color in my muted world. Her emerald green silk dress, the designer handbag dangling from her elbow, and her overpowering, expensive perfume that bulldozed the gentle scent of books and wood. Everything about her screamed new, costly, and utterly alien to my world. "Susan, darling." Her voice was bright, stretching the word darling like a ribbon. Her smile was brilliant, the kind you practice in a mirror, but it never, ever reached her eyes. Her eyes were always scanning, assessing, as if calculating the value of everything in their line of sight. She doesn't call me Mom, I thought to myself as I set the book down. She calls a title, a role she needs me to play. She swept into the room and gave me one of her fleeting, chilly hugs. I could feel the tension in her body, a poorly disguised impatience. "I have the most wonderful news. My entire family, all 28 of them, are flying in from California for Thanksgiving. Isn't that just fabulous? I've got it all planned. We're going to turn this place into a real-life Instagram postcard." We, that word echoed in my head, a fraudulent plural. For the last 5 years, ever since my son, Michael, brought this woman into our lives, her "we" always meant "you will do the work and I will take the credit." She'd say, "We should cook a grand dinner," and I would be the one shopping, prepping, and standing over a hot stove for 2 days. She'd say, "We need to tidy up the house for guests," and I would be the one on my hands and knees, cleaning up the mess she and her friends had made at their last weekend party. Michael, my dear hard-working son, an architect, was always caught up in his work and thoroughly enchanted by his wife. He loves her, a kind of love that made him blind to what was really happening under his own roof. He saw a vibrant, capable wife, not his aging mother being worn down into the role of an unpaid housekeeper. Jessica didn't wait for my response. She had her tablet out, her ever-present weapon, and was swiping at the screen with her perfectly manicured fingers. "Here, look," she said, turning the screen towards me. "I've pinned all the ideas on Pinterest. The theme is Classic New England Autumn. It's perfect for this house." On the screen were perfectly color-graded images, long tables draped in linen, elaborate centerpieces of gourds and dried flowers, and food that looked like it belonged in a magazine. I recognized the golden brown roast turkey, the pumpkin pie with its pristine whipped cream, and the sweet potato casserole with toasted marshmallows. They were all my signature dishes, family recipes passed down from my mother, who learned them from her mother. To me, they weren't just food. They were memories, an invisible thread connecting me to the women who came before me. But to Jessica, they were just props for her social media, pretty pictures for the perfect life she was trying to direct. "I've already emailed you the detailed menu." Her voice pulled me back. "A classic roast turkey, about 20 pounds should do it. Grandma's recipe for the pumpkin pie, make 2, my family adores that one. And of course, that sweet potato casserole you do so well. Oh, and Uncle Bill is coming, so be sure to make that apple crumble he likes." She said it so casually, as if reading a grocery list, as if my time and energy were an infinite resource she had every right to command. Uncle Bill was Paul's brother. Mentioning him was a little twist of the knife, a reminder that she knew how to use family sentiment to get her way. She didn't even ask if I wanted to do it, I thought, a cold knot forming in my chest. She didn't ask if I had the strength to cater to nearly 30 people. She simply issued her orders. "Oh, and one more thing," Jessica added, her eyes still glued to the screen. "My nieces and nephews will need their own rooms. The attic has those 2 empty bedrooms, right? Just make sure they're dusted and have fresh linens. The kids can be a bit of a handful." The attic. Those 2 rooms hadn't been used in years. They were covered in a thick layer of dust and filled with old storage boxes. Cleaning them wasn't a morning's chore. It was a week of hard labor. It meant climbing ladders, hauling boxes, and breathing in musty air. It was not a job for a 66-year-old woman with a chronic bad back. She finally looked up, smiling at me, the smile of a general who has issued her commands and expects nothing but total compliance. "It's going to be a Thanksgiving to remember, isn't it? I can't wait to show everyone what a wonderful family we have. Our family." There was that word again. A family where I was the invisible one, the silent labor behind the glamorous stage she built. I remembered Michael's birthday party last year. I had spent 3 days preparing everything. When their friends raved about the food, Jessica had gracefully accepted the compliment, saying, "Oh, it was nothing. I just love to putter around in the kitchen." She wasn't lying, precisely. She simply omitted my existence, turning me into just another part of the kitchen, an appliance not worth mentioning. The silence stretched, longer than usual. Normally, after a list of demands like this, I would sigh, nod, and say, "Of course, dear, leave it to me." It was the mantra I'd used for 5 years to keep the peace. A false peace, bought with my own dignity. But today, those words wouldn't come. They were stuck in my throat, bitter as poison. Her smile faltered a bit. A flicker of confusion crossed her ever-confident eyes. "Mom, did you hear me?" I looked at her. For the first time in a long, long time, I really looked at her. Not as my son's wife, not as family, but as a stranger who had invaded my life and turned it into something I no longer recognized. I saw the selfishness disguised as sweetness. I saw the ambition hidden behind pretty words. And I saw the absolute, utter disregard she had for me, for this house, for everything I held dear. In that moment, something inside me shifted. The thread of patience I had been clinging to for 5 years finally snapped, but it didn't snap with a loud bang. It broke silently, decisively, like a crack appearing in an ancient glacier. The change was irreversible. I took a deep breath, taking in the scent of books and wood again, as if drawing strength from my surroundings. I would not get angry. I would not yell. Anger was a waste of emotion on someone so undeserving. Instead, I would do what a history teacher does best. I would rewrite the narrative. She had planted the seed for her perfect party, a party built on my sacrifice. but she had no idea that the soil she was planting in was 5 years of my own quiet, cultivated rage. And this year's harvest, well, it was not going to be what she expected. The silence in the library became thick, heavy. The ticking of the clocks, once the gentle soundtrack to my life, now sounded like the countdown on a time bomb. With every passing second, the confusion on Jessica's face grew. She blinked a few times, her well-rehearsed smile beginning to show hairline cracks, like the glaze on an old teacup. She wasn't used to this silence from me. My silence was uncharted territory, and she was clearly feeling lost and uneasy. "Mom?" she repeated, and this time her voice had a slight edge of impatience. "Are you okay? I was talking about the Thanksgiving plans." I slowly placed the leather-bound book down on the oak table. The soft thud it made echoed in the still room, a sound of finality, as if closing one chapter and opening another. I looked up and met her eyes directly, a straight, unflinching gaze I hadn't used in 5 years. I kept my face perfectly neutral, a calm I'd learned from my father, an old soldier. He used to say that in a storm, stillness is the only anchor, and right then, I was in the eye of my own hurricane. "It sounds wonderful, Jessica," I said, and I was surprised by the sound of my own voice. It wasn't trembling, it wasn't angry. It was steady, clear, and as cool as the surface of an autumn lake. A big family gathering like that will certainly be memorable. A wave of relief washed over her face. Her smile began to return, thinking I was finally caving, just like always. She thought my silence was just me mentally calculating how many pounds of potatoes I'd need or how long the turkey would take to thaw. "Right?" she chirped, seizing on that glimmer of hope. "I knew you'd love it." But, I interrupted, with that single word. The word "but" hung in the air, sharp and unexpected as a shard of broken glass. Her smile froze mid-blossom. I rose slowly and walked over to Paul's old writing desk. Every step was deliberate, measured. I was no longer old Susan bustling around the kitchen. I was Susan, the mistress of this house, reclaiming my territory inch by inch. I opened the top right-hand drawer, where I kept important odds and ends. Inside, among old stamps and paper clips, was a postcard. A postcard I had bought last week, on a rare trip to the bookstore downtown. The front was a picture of the magnificent Montmorency Falls in Quebec, ablaze in autumn gold. I picked it up and walked back to where Jessica stood, her tablet now looking useless in her hand. I held the postcard out for her to see, like a teacher presenting an irrefutable piece of evidence. "I'm afraid I won't be able to make it," I continued, my voice maintaining that deadly calm. "I've booked a trip to Quebec for that very week. It's about time I saw a Canadian autumn for myself." If a sentence could make a sound, mine just made the sound of a large pane of glass shattering into a million pieces. Jessica stared at me, her mouth slightly agape. Her eyes were wide, not with surprise, but with sheer, unadulterated disbelief. She looked like a programmer who had just watched her flawless code suddenly crash without a single warning. In her carefully curated world, the script where I said no simply didn't exist. "What?" she finally managed to squeak out. You're kidding, right? Quebec? But it's Thanksgiving." She said the word Thanksgiving as if it were a sacred, unbreakable vow, a law that only a heathen would dare to defy. "Yes, Thanksgiving," I confirmed, "and I'll be spending it giving thanks that I'm still healthy enough to travel and see new things. But what about my family?" she stammered, her composure beginning to crumble. 28 people. I told them all about your cooking, about this cozy house. Everyone is so excited." "Ah, there it is," I thought. The issue wasn't my absence. The issue was that my absence would ruin the perfect image she had painted for her family. I wasn't a family member. I was part of the set dressing, a crucial prop. "Well then, perhaps this is a good opportunity," I said softly, but every word carried weight. "An opportunity for you to show them your own talents. Maybe you should start looking up some recipes. The trip is non-refundable, dear." Jessica's face went from pale to a blotchy red, a mixture of panic and fury. "You can't do this to me. This is so selfish. After everything Mike and I have done for you." "Done for me?" I repeated, and this time A sliver of emotion did enter my voice, a cold, sharp sliver of irony. You mean living in my house, using my things, and treating me like your personal, unpaid assistant? If that's what you've done for me, then perhaps I need a vacation from all that kindness. Just then, the front door opened again. My son, Michael, was home from work. He walked into the library, still in his suit, his tie loosened. He smiled when he saw both of us, a tired end of a long day smile. But that smile died instantly when he felt the atmosphere in the room. It was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. "What's going on?" he asked, his eyes darting between my frighteningly calm face and his wife's stunned, indignant one. Are you two fighting?" Jessica seized the opportunity. She rushed to Mike's side, clinging to his arm like a drowning woman grabbing a life raft. Her angry expression vanished, replaced by wide, tear-filled eyes, a performance she had long since perfected. "Mike, you have to talk to your mother," she said, her voice trembling with manufactured hurt. She says she's going to Canada for Thanksgiving. She's going to abandon us with my entire family here. She said we have to handle everything ourselves." Mike looked at me, his eyes filled with confusion and disbelief. In my son's eyes, I was always the gentle, accommodating mother, the one who put family above all else. This new version of me, rebellious, selfish, demanding, was a complete stranger to him. "Mom?" he asked, his voice full of doubt. "Is that true? Why would you do that?" I looked at my son, the child I had spent my life loving and protecting. I saw the conflict in his eyes, his loyalty to the wife he adored versus his lifelong bond with the mother who raised him. And I knew that for the past 5 years, that scale had always tipped in Jessica's favor. But today, I decided to place a very heavy weight on my side of the scale. I didn't answer his question right away. I just looked at him, letting my silence force him to think, to confront this absurd situation on his own. I let him wonder why his ever-sacrificing mother had suddenly refused. I wanted him to ask himself, just for a second, if maybe, just maybe, something was wrong in the wonderful family he was so proud of. Mike looked at me, his eyes a perfect copy of Paul's, brimming with confusion. "Mom? Why?" His question hung in the air between us, a simple question that held the weight of 5 years of my silence. How could I explain it to him? How could I possibly package all the little slights, the sugar-coated insults, the casual trampling of my dignity into a single answer? I couldn't. Not yet, anyway. Instead of answering, I just gazed out the window, where the last of the maple leaves were letting go, spiraling down on the cold wind. "I need a vacation, Mike," I said quietly, my voice now holding a genuine weariness. "That's all. I didn't sleep that night." The angry whispers from Jessica and the soothing murmurs from Mike drifted down the hall from their bedroom, muffled but clear enough for me to get the gist. Jessica was painting her portrait of me, the difficult, selfish, unreasonable old mother-in-law, and Mike, my poor son, was trying to calm his wife's fury, promising he would talk to me in the morning. I knew what that talk would be. It would be the same old lines. "Mom, please think of the family. Jessica means well. Please don't make things so complicated." I lay in bed, staring at the darkened ceiling, and the memories I'd been suppressing for months came flooding back, potent and bitter. My decision to go to Quebec wasn't a sudden whim. It wasn't an impulse. It was the final drop in a glass that had been full to the brim for a very long time. That glass had started to crack one afternoon back in April, 6 months earlier. It was a Tuesday afternoon, an ordinary day. Jessica and Mike were at work. The house was quiet, the way it was meant to be. I was dusting, a monotonous chore that gave me time to think. As I ran the soft cloth over the small end table in the corner of the living room, my hand met empty air where it shouldn't have. There was a space, a wrong space, where something familiar was supposed to be. I straightened up, staring at the empty spot on the floor. My heart began to beat a little faster. My parents' oak grandfather clock was gone. It wasn't just a piece of furniture. It was a member of the family. My father had bought it with his first paycheck after coming home from the war. My mother had wound it every Sunday evening for 40 years. I grew up with its steady, rhythmic ticking, a comforting sound, an assurance that all was right in my small world. Its deep, solemn chimes marked the hours of my life. My first day of school, my first date, the day Paul proposed to me in this very living room, and the day we brought a baby Michael home from the hospital. That clock had seen it all. It was the keeper of our time, the guardian of my family's memories. A mild panic began to rise in me. I walked through the house, searching, calling its name in my head as if it were a lost child. The dining room? No. The hallway? No. I even checked the storage room, a ridiculous thought that someone might have moved it. But there was nothing. Just that cold, empty space in the corner of the living room. That evening, when Jessica and Mike got home, I tried to keep my voice calm. "Jessica, have you seen the grandfather clock? I can't seem to find it." She was kicking off her expensive heels, not even bothering to look up at me. "Oh, that old thing," she said, her tone as casual as if she were talking about a flat sofa cushion. "It was ticking so loudly, it was distracting me when I work from home. I had a specialist from Boston pick it up. It's being serviced and polished. I want everything in this house to be perfect, you know. They'll bring it back when it's done." Her answer sounded plausible. It even sounded thoughtful. Serviced, polished, perfect. Those words soothed my anxiety at the time. I chided myself for being so suspicious. After all, maybe she was just trying to do something nice for the house. In the weeks that followed, I'd ask about the clock every now and then. "Is it ready yet, dear?" And every time, Jessica's answer was vague. "They're still working on it. These old pieces take time." Or, "They're waiting on a special part from Germany." Or, "The main craftsman has been ill." The excuses were always different, but they all served the same purpose, to push my question further away. Eventually, I stopped asking. The empty space in the corner remained, but I learned to live with it, the way one learns to live with an old scar. Until one night in late July. It was a hot, humid night, and I couldn't sleep. I went downstairs for a cool glass of water. As I passed Mike's office, I saw that Jessica had forgotten to turn off her laptop. The screen was still glowing, displaying a website I'd never seen before. It wasn't Facebook or a news site. The header read, "Timeless Treasures Auction House." An unhealthy curiosity compelled me. I knew I shouldn't. Prying was something I despised, but a gut feeling, a little voice in the back of my head, told me I needed to know. I pushed the door open gently. On the screen was a list of recently sold items. I scrolled past glittering jewelry, classic paintings, and fine china. And then I saw it. My heart stopped. It was my clock. Unmistakably. The Howard Miller Oak grandfather clock, circa 1946. I could see the familiar grain of the wood, the slightly tarnished brass face, and even the tiny, crescent-shaped scratch on the base where a 3-year-old Michael had once crashed his tricycle into it. The photograph was professional, lit to showcase its antique beauty. But to me, it just looked lonely, stolen from its home. And then I saw the text beneath the photo. The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. Sold for $18,000. $18,000. She hadn't sent it to be serviced. She had sold it. She had sold 80 years of my family's history. She had sold the chimes that lulled me to sleep, that woke me up, that had cried with me and celebrated with me. She had put a price tag on my memories, and that price was $18,000. I stood there, frozen. In the dark room, the screen's glow illuminating my face. The initial shock quickly gave way to a cold that settled deep in my bones. It wasn't anger. Anger is too hot, too loud. This was something else. A painful, crystal-clear realization. A complete and utter disillusionment. In that moment, it all made sense. The lavish Caribbean vacation they had just returned from. Jessica's latest designer handbag. The new SUV that Mike said he'd gotten with a surprise bonus at work. It was all paid for with the shattered pieces of my past. I don't know how long I stood there. By the time I made it back to my bedroom, the sky was beginning to lighten. I didn't cry. The tears felt frozen by the betrayal. Instead, a cold, diamond-hard resolve began to form within me. That night, I didn't just find the clock. Driven by a terrible certainty, I started searching. I typed in keywords: Vermont silver tea service, 19th century oil painting, pair of Meissen figurines. And one by one, my stolen memories appeared on the screen. My grandmother's silver tea set, her wedding gift, the landscape painting by a local artist that Paul and I had bought on our honeymoon. All of them sold, priced, and turned into cash to fund my daughter-in-law's fantasy lifestyle. She wasn't just taking things, she was erasing my history, piece by piece. She was turning my home into an empty shell, beautiful on the outside but with no soul left within. And that's when I knew I couldn't be silent anymore. My patience wasn't a virtue, it was complicity. My silence wasn't keeping the peace, it was enabling the destruction. I wouldn't confront her. Confronting someone like Jessica is like arguing with a hurricane. She would scream, cry, play the victim, and somehow twist it all around to make me and Mike feel guilty. No, I wouldn't do that. I was a history teacher. I knew that the most important battles aren't always won on a loud battlefield. Sometimes, they're won with quiet strategy, with the careful collection of evidence, and by choosing the perfect moment to strike. My trip to Quebec wasn't an escape. It was a tactical maneuver. It was the opening move in a chess game I was determined to win. Jessica thought this Thanksgiving would be her stage to shine, a chance to show off her fake success. But this time, the show would not go on as planned. The shock from that night of discovery didn't break me. On the contrary, it was like a shot of adrenaline, waking a part of me that had been dormant for years. The part that had built a life from scratch with my husband, Paul. The part that had single-handedly managed the books for his small construction company, dealing with tough suppliers and difficult employees. That pragmatic, methodical, and resilient part of me was now wide awake. The grief of betrayal was still there, smoldering like a coal under a bed of ash, but now it was encased in a layer of icy resolve. The next morning, after a sleepless night, I didn't make my usual big breakfast. I just brewed a strong cup of black tea, sat down at the kitchen table, and started outlining my plan in an old notebook. No tears, no wailing. I was acting like a historian preparing for a critical excavation. My mission: to gather evidence, determine the full scope of the deception, and prepare to reveal the truth in a way that could not be denied. The first and most crucial step was to contact Uncle Bill. Bill wasn't just Paul's older brother. He was my husband's confidant, the only man on earth Paul trusted completely. After Paul passed, Bill had become a sort of silent guardian for me and Mike. He lived in Boston, where he ran a reputable and well-respected antiques business. He had a keen eye for true value, not just in objects but in people. If anyone could understand the deep offense of having family legacy treated as common merchandise, it was Bill. I didn't call him right away. I waited until mid-morning, when I knew he'd have had his second cup of coffee and would be settled in his back office. I drove to a small cafe in the next town over, a place where I knew I wouldn't run into anyone I knew. I didn't want to make this call from my house, where the walls suddenly felt like they had ears. I sat in my car in a quiet corner of the parking lot, watching strangers go about their day, and dialed his number. "O'Connell's Antiques," Bill speaking. His deep, gravelly voice answered. "Bill," I said, trying to keep my own voice steady. "It's me, Sue." There was a brief pause. "Sue? What's wrong? You sound off. Is Mike okay?" The immediate concern in his voice brought a lump to my throat, but I swallowed it down. This was no time for weakness. "Mike's fine, Bill. I need your help. It's important. And it's about Paul's legacy." I had used the right word. Legacy. I knew it would carry weight with Bill. I heard a rustling sound on his end, probably him closing his office door. "Talk to me," he said, his voice all business now. And so I told him. I told him everything, from the empty space in the living room and Jessica's lies to the horrifying discovery on the auction website. I read him the list of sold items, my voice flat and emotionless, like a court clerk reading an indictment. With each item I named, the silence on his end grew heavier. I could picture his face, his rugged features hardening, his blue eyes darkening with anger. When I finished, the silence held for a few seconds. Then I heard a long, heavy sigh. "That girl," he growled. "That little viper. I never trusted her. Paul never would have either." "I know," I replied softly, but Mike does. He loves her, Bill. Love is no excuse for deception and theft, Sue, he said, his voice thick with indignation. All right, leave it with me. What do you need me to do? You say the word, and I'll drive down there right now and throw her out of your house myself. No, I said firmly. That's too easy for her. She'd just play the victim, and Mike would take her side. I'm not going to lose my son, Bill. I want my son to see the truth for himself. So what's the plan, Professor? He asked, and I could hear a hint of respect in his voice. I need you to do two things. First, using your expertise, I need you to find a way to gather all the transaction records, invoices, seller names, final prices, everything. I need irrefutable proof. Second, I took a breath. I need you to play the part of a buyer. Keep an eye on the auction sites, see if anything else from my house pops up. If it does, make inquiries, get information, but most importantly, don't let anyone know who you are or that you're connected to me. I get it, Bill said instantly. You're setting a trap. Smart. Us old foxes love a good trap. He paused for a moment. Sue, are you all right? I will be, I answered, and as I said it, I knew it was true. For the first time in a long time, I know exactly what I have to do. After that call, an invisible weight lifted from my shoulders. I was no longer alone in this fight. I had an ally, one I could trust without question. When I got home, I started my part of the plan. I moved systematically, like I was archiving a collection. I walked through every room, holding the smartphone Mike had given me for Christmas last year, a piece of technology I had rarely used. Now, it was my most important tool. I took pictures. I photographed everything. Every valuable item, every keepsake, every corner of my home. I took close-ups of Paul's coin collection in its glass case. I photographed the Vermont landscape oil paintings on the walls, making sure to capture the artist's signature in the corner. I documented the Limoges china my mother only used on special occasions, turning over each plate to photograph the maker's mark on the back. I took pictures of the crystal paperweights, the old silver boxes, the rare books with authors' signatures. Each photo was proof of existence, a record of what was still here. I was creating a detailed inventory, a visual indictment. If Jessica tried to sell anything else, I would know, and I would have proof. I uploaded all the photos to a secure cloud storage account, gave it a complex password, and sent a copy to Bill. For the next few weeks, I lived a double life. By day, I was still pleasant Susan, the devoted mother-in-law. I cooked good meals, kept the house clean, and smiled and nodded at Jessica's demands. I played my part so perfectly it sometimes amazed even me. I listened to her complain about her job at the art gallery, nodded along with her shopping plans, and offered sympathy when she spoke of the pressures of her life. But at night, when the house was silent, I became an investigator. Bill and I communicated frequently through encrypted emails. He sent me what he found, copies of electronic receipts, exchanges between the seller J Designs, C.A., the audacity of that name, and various buyers. The evidence mounted. The total amount of money Jessica had made from selling off my past was approaching $40,000. I learned to mask my emotions perfectly. I would watch Jessica preen in a new dress she'd bought with the money from my grandmother's necklace, and I would smile. But behind that smile, my contempt had crystallized, becoming as hard and cold as a shard of ice. I no longer saw her as my daughter-in-law. I saw her as a subject of study, a con artist whose file I was meticulously compiling. The Thanksgiving plan, when she proposed it, felt like a gift from the heavens. It was the stage I had been looking for. A perfect stage, with a full audience, where Jessica's grand performance would reach its climax and where I would bring the curtain down on it in the most spectacular way possible. The morning I packed for my Quebec trip was a Saturday, 5 days before Thanksgiving. The Vermont sky was a flat, heavy gray, promising a cold rain. The atmosphere inside the house was just as tense. Since the bombshell in the library, a frosty silence had descended between me and Jessica. She avoided me, speaking only when absolutely necessary, and shot me resentful, accusing glances when she thought I wasn't looking. She was like a spoiled child who'd been denied a favorite toy, utterly incapable of considering why it had been denied. Mike was stuck in the middle, miserable and helpless. My son tried to play peacemaker, but his attempts were clumsy and pathetic. "Mom, are you really sure you can't change your mind?" he asked me that morning as I was pulling my old suitcase down from the attic. The tweed suitcase had traveled with me and Paul to so many cities. Now it looked ancient next to Jessica's designer luggage. "No, Mike," I answered gently but firmly. I was folding a soft merino wool sweater, a gift from Paul years ago. "I've had this planned for a long time." "But Jess is really upset," he said, lowering his voice as if sharing a state secret. "She feels like you're punishing her." "You're only half right, son," I thought. "I'm not punishing. I'm delivering justice." "That's not my intention," I lied smoothly. "I just think it's time you two, as a couple, hosted a major family event on your own. Think of it as practice. It'll be good for you." I framed it as a matter of responsibility, using the very language of family and adulthood that he couldn't argue with. Mike sighed, his face a mask of conflict. He loved his wife, but he couldn't deny the logic in what I was saying. Finally, he just muttered, "I don't know. This is all so complicated," and retreated downstairs, leaving me alone with my silent preparations. The final stage of setting the trap required an artisan's touch. Every move I made that morning was calculated. First, the suitcase. I packed only simple clothes, enough for a few days, things I would actually wear at the boutique seaside hotel I had secretly booked just 2 hours' drive away. But I left the suitcase open on my bed, next to some Quebec travel guides and Canadian postcards, to reinforce my story. Next, it was time to stage the scene. I knew Jessica. Her greed was matched only by her laziness. She wouldn't go looking for things to sell. The item had to present itself to her, tempting and seemingly easy for the taking. So, I decided to give her an irresistible target: Paul's stamp collection. It wasn't the most valuable collection in the house in terms of money, but it was the most sentimentally significant to my late husband. He'd started it as a boy, and every stamp had a story. He could spend hours telling me about a misprinted stamp from a long-lost British colony, or the one commemorating the first transatlantic flight. The collection was stored in a beautiful mahogany box, intricately carved with a clipper ship, a gift from his grandfather. That box, to me, was as precious as the stamps it held. I carefully removed every single stamp album from the box. I wrapped them in an old velvet cloth and hid them deep in the bottom of my linen closet, behind the heavy winter blankets. The mahogany box was now empty. Then, I made my move. I carried the now empty, deceptively light box from my study out to the living room. I didn't place it somewhere obvious. I set it on a small table near the window, where the morning light would catch it, highlighting its fine carving. It was visible enough to draw the eye, but placed just casually enough to seem as if it had been accidentally left out. Jessica, who was sulking on the sofa, scrolling through her phone, looked up as I passed. I saw her eyes linger on the box for a split second. It was only a second, but it was enough. The look was a mixture of curiosity and a fast, flickering calculation. I knew the bait was in the water. The fish had seen it. "What are you doing with that box?" she asked, feigning indifference. "Oh, just giving it a little dusting before I leave," I replied casually. "It's gotten so dusty." I set the box down, wiped my hands, and turned away as if it were the most unimportant thing in the world. My final act before leaving was a call to Bill. "Everything's in place," I said quietly into the phone from the garage. "The box is on the table. I give it 2 days, tops." "Good work, Sue," Bill replied, his voice buzzing with excitement. "I'm ready on my end. I've set up a new account on the auction site, posing as a wealthy stamp collector from Switzerland. I'll be watching it like a hawk." "Thank you, Bill, for everything." "Don't thank me. Just make Paul proud," he said. When I dragged my suitcase down the stairs, Mike was waiting at the door. He looked miserable. "Mom, I'll drive you to the airport." "No need, honey," I said, placing a hand on his cheek. "I've already called a cab. You should stay here with your wife. She needs you right now." My words had a double meaning, but I knew Mike would only hear the surface level. Jessica stood in the doorway of the living room, her arms crossed, saying nothing. She didn't walk me to the door. Her eyes weren't on me. They were fixed on the small table by the window. The taxi arrived. The driver helped me with my bag. Before getting in, I turned and took one last look at my home. It was a strange feeling. I was leaving, but not running away. I was making a tactical retreat, like a general leaving the field to get a better view of the battle. As the taxi pulled away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. I saw Mike still standing in the doorway, looking lonely and lost. Jessica had vanished from sight. I knew exactly where she was. She was, I was certain, making her way toward the mahogany box, her heart pounding with greed and guilty excitement. The boutique hotel I'd chosen was nestled on the shore of Lake Champlain, a mere 2-hour drive north. It was the complete opposite of my home. Modern, minimalist, with huge glass walls that looked out onto the still gray water. The peace here was different. It didn't come from history and memory, but from emptiness, a freedom from attachments. I'd booked a top-floor suite with a private balcony and a large soaking tub. For the first time in 5 years, I was truly alone, with no one to serve and no schedule to follow. The luxury felt deliciously rebellious. I ordered room service, a platter of fresh oysters and a glass of champagne, things Jessica would have scoffed at as old-fashioned and expensive. I soaked in the hot tub, gazing out at the vast expanse of the lake, and for the first time in months, I felt my body unwind. But this was not a vacation of blissful ignorance. I was like a leopard resting on a high branch, relaxed, but with my eyes constantly scanning the savannah below. My phone was always within arm's reach, on silent, but with the screen set to light up for notifications. I was waiting. Meanwhile, back at my house in Vermont, a different kind of chaos was just beginning to simmer. Jessica's first relatives began to arrive on Monday afternoon, 2 days ahead of schedule. They were a loud, boisterous clan from California, descending with oversized suitcases, booming laughter, and grand expectations of the quaint, postcard-perfect New England Thanksgiving Jessica had promised them. I wasn't there, but I could picture it all vividly, piecing it together from Mike's short, panicked text messages and my own imagination. I pictured Jessica, dressed in an expensive cream-colored cashmere sweater, opening the door with a bright but brittle smile. I could see her giving them the grand tour, boasting about her taste, pointing to the antique furniture as if she had personally chosen each piece. But the facade could only hold for so long. The house, for the first time, betrayed her. It lacked a soul. There was no welcoming aroma of baking apple pie wafting from the kitchen. There were no vases of fresh autumn chrysanthemums, which I always kept. The fireplace was cold and unlit. The house was still beautiful, but it was like a museum, a sterile showroom, not a home. It smells a little musty in here. I could just hear one of Jessica's aunts remarking, an innocent comment that would have stung Jessica to the core. The real chaos started in the kitchen. Jessica had ushered everyone in, a room she normally only entered to grab a glass of wine or to give me an order. Now, she had to stand there, in the role of hostess. "I'm starving, Jess," her younger, even louder sister announced. "What have you got for snacks?" And that's when Jessica realized her first fatal error. The refrigerator was nearly empty. I had deliberately not gone grocery shopping before I left. There were a few eggs, a nearly empty carton of milk, and some wilted vegetables. The pantry was no better. No crackers, no chips, none of the comfort snacks a large family requires. I pictured her desperately opening cabinet doors, her smile growing more and more strained. "Oh, I was just about to go to the market for fresh ingredients for the feast," she would have stammered, lying through her teeth. The problems compounded. My old kitchen stove is a cast-iron beast, a relic from another era. It cooks like a dream if you know its quirks, but to a novice, it's a confusing mess of knobs and levers. When Jessica tried to turn on the oven to heat up some frozen pizzas, Mike had to make a frantic run for she couldn't get it to work. "This stupid oven won't turn on." I could imagine her shrieking, her frustration cracking her graceful veneer. The pinnacle of her incompetence came when one of her uncles, a big, jolly man, asked, "Hey Jess, where's the coffee? I could use a cup after that long flight." Coffee. Such a simple request. But Jessica had never made a pot of coffee in her life. She fumbled with my French press, spilling grounds all over the counter, then managed to burn her hand with the hot water. In the end, what she produced was a weak, bitter, undrinkable liquid. All the while, my phone was buzzing with texts from Mike. 5:15 p.m. Mom, Jess's aunt and uncle are here. Early. 5:45 p.m. There's no food in the house. I'm making a pizza run. 6:30 p.m. Jess can't figure out the oven. Can you walk me through it over the phone? 7 p.m. Do you know where you keep the coffee filters? I read each message with a small, grim smile. I replied to my son with brief, vague answers. Try the left-hand cupboard. Or, I don't remember, honey. You'll have to look. I was not helping. I was letting her drown in the mess she had created. Every text from Mike was proof of their complete and utter dependence on me, a dependence they had never once acknowledged. Mom, Jess is really stressed out. A voicemail from Mike came through. His voice was tired and frayed. It's chaos here. Everyone keeps asking where you are. Can you please come home early? Even just for a day. I listened to that message over and over. I heard the desperation in my son's voice. A part of me, the maternal, instinctual part, wanted to rush back immediately, to fix everything, to bring order to the chaos, to protect my son from embarrassment. But the wounded, awakened part of me won. I took a deep breath, looking out at the placid lake. I replied to my son with a text. I'm sure you two can handle it. Think of it as practice. The cell service is spotty where I am. Don't worry about me. It was a lie, of course. The cell service was perfect. But I needed to cut the cord, at least for a while. I needed to let the chaos fester, to let Jessica's clumsy charade play out. Because only when things got bad enough would Mike finally begin to see the truth. That evening, an email notification lit up my phone's screen. It was from Bill. The subject line contained just 4 words, "Fish on the line." My heart gave a thump. I opened the email. Inside was a link to the auction website. And there, on the front page of the new arrivals section, was a professional photograph of my husband's mahogany box, gleaming under studio lights. The description read, "Rare carved mahogany valuables box, late 19th century, exquisite condition, seller, J Designs, CA. The starting bid, $500. Jessica hadn't wasted any time. In her desperation, stripped of my support and facing the pressure of her family, she had reverted to the only problem-solving method she knew, turning someone else's memories into cash. The evening before Thanksgiving should have been the crescendo of happy preparations. My house should have been filled with the warm scents of cinnamon and nutmeg and the sounds of cheerful chatter. Instead, it was thick with a tense, suffocating atmosphere. Jessica's fumbling over the past 2 days had turned the house into a messy refugee camp rather than a cozy holiday retreat. Paper pizza plates overflowed the trash can, damp towels were strewn about, and the whining of tired, overstimulated children echoed in the halls. Jessica, having failed at playing the capable hostess, had switched to another role, the martyr. I could just picture her, draped dramatically on the sofa, telling her relatives how her mother-in-law had suddenly abandoned her, leaving her with this enormous burden. She was skillfully spinning the narrative of my selfishness, making my absence the cause of every inconvenience they were suffering. Mike was at his breaking point. He was torn between trying to clean up the mess, placate his increasingly grumpy guests, and defend his tragedian wife. My son looked like a man trying to hold back a collapsing dam with his bare hands. I knew all of this, not just from my imagination, but from a few clipped texts from Mike, which were becoming less frequent and more desperate. I didn't respond. My silence, I knew, was more powerful than any words could be. And then, at 7 o'clock in the evening, the appointed hour arrived. In my luxurious hotel suite, I sat by the window, a glass of red wine in my hand. My phone was on the table, open to my message thread with Bill. I had spoken to him that afternoon, confirming the final details. My heart was beating a little faster, a mix of nerves and anticipation. The curtain was about to rise on the final act. 7:01 p.m., text from Bill, arrived, at the front door. Me, replying, "Break a leg, old friend." Bill, "Don't need luck. Just the truth." The doorbell rang. The sound chimed through the unnaturally quiet house, making a few people jump. Who on earth could that be? Jessica's mother grumbled. Mike, looking relieved for an excuse to leave the stuffy room, rushed to the door. "Probably the delivery guy with more Chinese food," he said. But the man at the door was not a delivery guy. He was tall, with salt and pepper hair, dressed in a handsome tweed jacket. He had an air of quiet authority. It was Uncle Bill. "Uncle Bill!" Mike exclaimed, surprise and relief washing over his face. "I didn't think you were coming until tomorrow." "Decided to come a bit early," Bill said, his voice a low, warm rumble. He stepped inside, bringing with him a gust of fresh, confident air from the outside world. He shook Mike's hand warmly, then his eyes scanned the living room. "Evening, everyone. I'm Bill O'Connell, Susan's late husband's brother." His presence immediately changed the energy in the room. He was like a lead actor stepping onto the stage, commanding all attention. Jessica scrambled to her feet, forcing a welcoming smile onto her face. "Uncle Bill," she cooed. "So good of you to come. It's just a shame Susan isn't here. She was called away on urgent business." "Oh, I know," Bill said casually, shrugging off his coat. "Sue told me all about it." He paused, looking directly at Jessica. "In fact, I'm partly here on business myself tonight." Jessica blinked, confused. "Business?" "That's right," Bill said, placing his old but elegant leather briefcase on the coffee table. The metallic click of its latches sounded loud in the silence. "I've been commissioned by a client in Europe to inspect and appraise a few antiques in the area, and as luck would have it, one of the items used to belong to this family." The room was utterly still. Every eye was on Bill. Mike looked curious, while Jessica's face had taken on a wary expression. "An item?" Mike asked. "Indeed," Bill said, opening his briefcase. He didn't take out any papers just yet. Instead, he looked around the room, his professional appraiser's gaze sweeping over every piece of furniture. His eyes came to rest on the familiar empty space in the corner. "Let's start with the Howard Miller grandfather clock I gave Susan and Paul as a wedding present," he said, his voice gentle and conversational. "A beautiful piece, solid oak. Where has it gotten to, Jessica? The last time I was here, it was standing right over there." All eyes now swiveled from Bill to Jessica. The room seemed to shrink, leaving just the two of them in the spotlight. The color drained from Jessica's face. "Oh, she stammered, her eyes darting around for an escape. It's being serviced." "In Boston. It was getting old." She repeated the old lie, but this time her voice had no conviction. Bill raised one eyebrow, a look of polite skepticism on his face. "Serviced? In Boston? What a strange coincidence," he said, his tone still light. "Because you see, I just bought it from an online auction house based in New York last week, for that very same European client I mentioned. If the room had been quiet before, it was now utterly dead. Even breathing seemed to have stopped. Bill's statement was a slow-motion explosion, and everyone in the room could hear the fuse sizzling. Mike was the first to react. "Bought it? What are you talking about, Uncle Bill? There must be some mistake." "Oh, I don't think there's any mistake, Mike," Bill said, finally pulling a sheaf of papers from his briefcase. He laid it on the table. "Technology is a marvelous thing. Every transaction leaves a trail." He flipped open the first page. It was a high-quality color printout of my grandfather clock, unmistakable. Beneath it were the details of the auction. "And here," Bill said, his finger tapping one line of text, "is the seller's name." He read it out loud, slowly and clearly. "J Designs, C.A." Sounds very professional, doesn't it? Jessica swayed on her feet, as if she'd been physically struck. She gripped the back of the sofa to steady herself. All the color had leached from her face. The mask of sweet, charming Jessica had shattered, revealing raw, naked panic and guilt. I don't know what you're talking about," she whispered, but her words were weak, unconvincing. "Then let me help you understand," Bill said, turning to the next page. "Perhaps we should talk about Susan's grandmother's silver tea service?" The second blow had been struck, not by me, but by my ally. The at-home trial had officially begun, and the defendant, with no lawyer and nowhere to run, stood trembling in the harsh light of the truth. It was curtains for Jessica's act. The living room, which should have been buzzing with the happy sounds of a family reunion, had become a suffocating courtroom. Uncle Bill, with his calm and authoritative demeanor, was the prosecutor. Jessica was the defendant, trembling in an invisible witness box, and her entire family, along with my son Michael, were the unwilling jury. The silence was so profound I felt I could hear the frantic beating of Jessica's heart all the way from my lakeside hotel. Bill didn't let that silence linger. He proceeded like a seasoned lawyer, presenting his evidence methodically, coldly, and irrefutably. "The silver tea service," he repeated, his voice echoing in the room. He turned to the next page in his file. There, in crisp detail, was the tea set my grandmother had given my mother, and my mother had given to me. The intricate rose pattern, the gracefully curved spout, it was all there. A Gorham sterling silver set, circa 1920. A true family heirloom. Sold this past June. Final price, $7,200. Seller, J Designs, CA. He paused, letting the information sink in. Jessica's mother, normally a boisterous woman, now sat as still as a statue, her hand covering her mouth, her eyes wide with horror as she stared at her daughter. "And here," Bill continued, flipping another page, his voice a steady, judicial rhythm, "the pair of Meissen porcelain figurines, the shepherd and shepherdess, a gift Susan's father brought back from Germany after the war. Extremely rare. Sold in August. $11,500. Seller, again, J Designs, CA. With every page that turned, another piece of Mike's world crumbled. I could picture my son's face, shifting from confusion to disbelief, then to horror, and finally to an undeniable, soul-deep pain. He looked from the papers on the table to his ashen-faced wife. He looked like a man who had just discovered the house he lived in was built on a foundation of rot. "Jess." His voice was a trembling whisper. These things, did you?" He couldn't finish the sentence. The question was too monstrous to speak aloud. Jessica didn't answer. She just shook her head frantically, tears finally beginning to stream down her face. But these weren't the manipulative tears of injustice she so often used with Mike. These were the tears of pure fear and humiliation. "Perhaps you need another reminder," Bill said, his voice devoid of sympathy. He turned to a page with a smaller photograph. "How about this one, Mike? Do you recognize it?" Mike leaned over to look, his breath caught in his throat. It was the display case of his grandfather's military medals. The Purple Heart, the Silver Star, and others, all neatly arranged in their velvet-lined box. They were symbols of a generation's courage and sacrifice. They were priceless. "No," Mike breathed, his voice breaking. He looked up at his wife, and for the first time his eyes held an emotion I had never seen him direct at Jessica. Revulsion. "Jess, not this. You couldn't have. You sold Grandpa's medals?" I didn't mean to." Jessica finally broke into heaving, desperate sobs. "I needed the money. I had debts. You never understand the pressure I'm under." "Pressure?" Bill interjected, his voice like ice. "The pressure to maintain a lifestyle you can't afford? The pressure to lie to your husband and his family? You call that pressure? I call it greed and a complete lack of character." "I'll pay it back," Jessica cried. "I promise. I'll buy it all back." "Buy it back?" Bill scoffed, a humorless smile touching his lips. "How do you buy back history, Jessica? How do you buy back a soldier's honor? Do you think everything in this world has a price tag?" The room erupted in chaos. Jessica's relatives began whispering amongst themselves, shocked and ashamed. Her father, a quiet man, simply stood up and walked out onto the porch, unable to bear it. Her mother began to weep, not for her daughter, it seemed, but for the sheer humiliation of it all. Through it all, Bill maintained his terrifying calm. He gestured toward the empty mahogany box, still sitting on the small table by the window, the box I had left as bait. "And I suppose," he said, his voice cutting through the noise, "that my brother's last legacy, the stamp collection he spent his entire life building, has also been appraised for its cash value, has it?" All eyes went to the box. It sat there, silent, a physical symbol of the emptiness and betrayal. It was the final, devastating blow. Jessica collapsed onto the sofa in a heap, her body racked with sobs. All her fight was gone. She was exposed, with no lies left to hide behind. Her grand performance, her elaborate production of the perfect wife and hostess, had been brought to a brutal, public, and humiliating end. But Bill wasn't finished. He looked directly at Mike, who was standing, shell-shocked, in the middle of the room. "And you, Mike," he said, his voice now laced not with anger, but with profound disappointment. "Where were you in all of this? You live in this house. Did you not notice these things disappearing, or did you just choose not to see?" Bill's question was a knife to Mike's heart. It forced him to confront a truth even more painful than his wife's deceit, his own silent complicity. He had been too busy, too tired, too enamored to see the warning signs. He had let the comfort and the pretty surface of his life blind him to the decay happening right under his nose. Mike didn't answer. He just lowered his head, his broad, strong shoulders now slumped under the crushing weight of guilt and shame. The next morning, Thanksgiving Day, I drove home. My retreat in the luxury hotel was over. It was time. I had followed the at-home trial through a running commentary of texts from Bill. He had stayed the night, not as a guest, but as a warden, ensuring the truth wasn't twisted or buried under a fresh wave of crocodile tears. The Vermont sky that day was impossibly clear and blue, as if the emotional storm of the previous night had scrubbed the world clean. As I turned onto my street, I saw that a few of the cars belonging to Jessica's family were already gone. A quiet exodus. The storybook holiday had ended before it even began. I parked in the garage and entered through the back door, into my kitchen. The house was unnaturally quiet. Not the peaceful quiet I cherished, but the heavy, oppressive silence of a place after a tragedy. The sink was piled with dirty dishes from the night before, and leftover Chinese food containers sat on the counter. A sour smell of failure hung in the air. I walked into the living room. The scene was even more desolate than I had imagined. Bill sat in Paul's armchair, nursing a cup of coffee, his face grim. A few of Jessica's closest relatives remained, including her parents, who were huddled on the sofa looking 10 years older. Mike was sitting by himself near the window, his back to the room, his shoulders slumped. And Jessica. She was curled up in a corner on a small chair, looking like a chastised child. Her perfect makeup was gone, revealing a face puffy from crying. Her sleek blonde hair was a mess. She was wearing a crumpled set of pajamas. The glamorous shell was gone. For the first time, I was seeing the real person, small, scared, and pathetic. But I felt no pity. My entrance startled them. Mike was the first to turn. When he saw me, a complex flood of emotions crossed his face: relief, shame, and a hint of fear. "Mom," he whispered. I didn't look at Jessica. My gaze was fixed on my son. I walked directly to him, my steps steady and sure. I was not the mother returning to comfort a grieving child. I was the mother returning to force him to face the consequences. I stood before him, forcing him to look up at me. "Hello, Michael," I said. My voice wasn't cold, but it wasn't warm either. It was simply factual. "I hope you've had some time to think." My son didn't answer. He just bowed his head, unable to meet my eyes. I turned to address the room. "These things," I began, my voice clear and steady. "The things that were taken, they aren't just wood and silver and porcelain. They are stories. They are the physical proof of lives lived, of love shared, and of sacrifices made under this roof." I paused, letting my words settle into the silence. "And today," I continued, "a new story will be written. A story of accountability, of restitution, and of restoring what was broken." Right on cue, the doorbell rang. Bill got up to answer it. It was Mr. Miller, my family's old lawyer and a friend of Paul's. I had called him the night before. He entered, briefcase in hand, his presence immediately lending a legal gravity to the room. "Good morning," Mr. Miller said, his tone professional yet sympathetic. He nodded to the room. "I understand there are some family matters that require clarification. At the request of my client, Mrs. Susan O'Connell, an agreement has been drafted." Jessica's head snapped up, her eyes wide with fresh terror at the words lawyer and agreement. Mr. Miller walked to the coffee table, placing his briefcase right next to Bill's file. The two documents lay side by side, the evidence of the crime and the terms of the penance. "Mrs. O'Connell has made me aware of the situation," Mr. Miller said, looking directly at Jessica. "Jessica, you have two options. He pulled a document from his briefcase. Option 1. Mrs. O'Connell will proceed with filing a police report. With the evidence Mr. O'Connell has gathered, criminal charges of grand larceny are a certainty. The consequences would likely involve a prison sentence. Jessica's mother let out a strangled sob. Jessica herself looked like she might faint. Or, Mr. Miller continued, pulling out a second document, you can sign this contract. He placed the contract on the table. I had worked on it with him, meticulously. This contract, he explained, is a civil agreement. The terms are as follows. He put on his reading glasses and began to read. 1. Jessica O'Connell agrees to secure full-time employment within 30 days. 100% of her after-tax income will be deposited into an escrow account managed by my firm. 2. The funds in that account will be used to pay restitution for the full, independently appraised value of all items sold. The first priority will be attempting to buy back the original items, where possible. 3. Until the final item is fully paid for, Jessica will have no proprietary rights to any assets within this home. She will reside here as a tenant, nothing more. She will not be permitted to make any decisions regarding renovations, decor, or the disposition of any furnishings. 4. Michael O'Connell, as her husband, will be a co-signer and will oversee the execution of this contract. Any violation of these terms by Jessica will result in Option 1 being immediately activated. Mr. Miller placed the contract down. This is not forgiveness, Jessica. This is a path. A very long and difficult path to earning back trust and making amends. The choice is yours. The room held its breath. All eyes were on Jessica. She sat there, trembling, staring at the contract as if it were her own death warrant. I knew I was being harsh. I was stripping her of all her power, all her control. But I was also giving her a chance she didn't deserve. A chance to become a better person, to learn the value of work and honesty. Finally, after a silence that felt like an eternity, Jessica slowly rose to her feet. She walked to the table and, with a shaking hand, took the pen Mr. Miller offered. Her tears fell onto the paper, smudging the ink. With her family and mine as witnesses, with the lawyer, the uncle-in-law, and the heartbroken husband looking on, Jessica signed her name. There was no roast turkey that Thanksgiving, no pumpkin pie. Jessica's remaining family left quietly after the contract was signed, offering shame-faced apologies and hasty goodbyes. My house, for the first time on a major holiday, was eerily empty and quiet. The 4 of us who remained, me, Mike, Jessica, and Uncle Bill, had a late Thanksgiving dinner. It was a simple meal of chicken soup I'd made from scratch, served with toasted bread. We sat around the small kitchen table, not the formal one in the dining room. Nobody said much. The silence was no longer tense, but exhausted, the quiet acceptance of a new, raw reality. Jessica barely looked up during the meal. She ate mechanically, all her airs and graces gone. She looked like a doll with its strings cut. I didn't speak to her, not out of hatred, but because there was simply nothing left to say. Words were now meaningless. Only actions would matter. Uncle Bill left the next morning. Before he went, he gave me a long, hard hug. "You did the right thing, Sue," he whispered. "You did what Paul would have wanted. You defended your home." "Thank you, Bill," I replied, and this time the tears that came were tears of pure relief. "Thank you for being my brother." The months that followed were a slow, difficult adjustment. Life in the house was not the same. It was like an awkward cohabitation of strangers. True to her word, Jessica found a job. Not in a chic art gallery, but as a full-time sales associate at a large department store. She had to learn to stand for 8 hours a day, to deal with difficult customers, and to live on a modest paycheck. Every 2 weeks, I would see Mike drive his wife to the bank to deposit her paycheck into the escrow account. I never went with them. That was their burden to bear, their path to walk. My son's marriage was deeply wounded. A vast silence stretched between them. There was no more easy laughter, no more casual affection. Mike worked longer hours, often coming home late. He treated Jessica with a distant civility, more like a warden than a husband. I didn't know if they would make it. The wounds of betrayal run deep, and I wasn't sure if even love could heal them. One afternoon in the spring, about 6 months after that fateful Thanksgiving, a small delivery truck pulled up to the house. 2 large men carefully carried a shape wrapped in thick moving blankets into the living room. It was the grandfather clock. Bill, through his network of contacts, had tracked down the buyer. It was a collector in Switzerland, the very client he had invented. After much negotiation by Mr. Miller and Bill, and with the first funds from Jessica's salary, they had persuaded the man to sell it back. Mike and I unwrapped it together. When the oak clock was revealed, whole and dignified as it ever was, I couldn't help but reach out and stroke the warm wood. It was back. The first piece of the house's soul had returned. Mike, with the help of the delivery men, positioned the clock back in its rightful place in the corner. The cold, empty space was filled. After they left, it was just me and my son in the living room. "Mom," Mike said, his voice thick with emotion. He looked at me, his eyes full of a remorse that time hadn't seemed to lessen. "I'm so sorry. I was a terrible son. I let this happen." I went to him, and for the first time in months, I put my hand on his shoulder like I used to when he was a boy. "Blindness is not a crime, Mike," I told him, repeating the thought I'd had before, "but refusing to see is. You see now, that's what matters." He nodded, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek. I walked over to the clock and opened the small glass door. My hands, though a little shaky with age, knew exactly what to do. I inserted the metal key and wound it gently. The brass pendulum began to swing, slowly at first, then finding its rhythm. Tick-tock, tick-tock. The familiar, steady sound once again filled the silence of the house. It wasn't just counting the passing seconds. It was the heartbeat of a home, a heart that had stopped and was now finally beating again. Jessica stood in the doorway, watching silently. I didn't know what she was thinking. Her face was a blank slate. Maybe she felt remorse. Maybe she just felt bitter. Her road ahead was still very long. It would take years, maybe the rest of her life, to pay back the debt she had incurred, and not just the financial one. I looked at my son, and then at my daughter-in-law. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if their little family could be mended, but that was no longer entirely my burden. I had done what I had to do. I had drawn the lines. I had restored the truth. I turned back to the clock. Its ticking was so steady, so reliable. It doesn't just count the time that passes, I thought, my inner voice finally at peace. It serves as a reminder that legacy isn't in the objects, but in the respect we show the past. That a family, like this clock, needs to be tended to and wound with honesty, or it will simply stop. And that sometimes, to get things working again, you have to let them be still for a while. A painful, necessary stillness, so that everyone can finally hear the silence. And in that silence, maybe, just maybe, they can find the true value of what was lost. I smiled, a genuine, peaceful smile. The clock began to chime the hour, its notes echoing through the house. 1, 2, 3. It was time to begin again. 5 years have passed since that fateful Thanksgiving. 5 years. It's long enough for the deepest wounds to scar over, even if they still ache a little when the weather changes. My house is quieter now, a true quiet, not a tense silence. Sometimes that quiet feels like loneliness, but then I remind myself that loneliness in the truth is infinitely better than company in a lie. Paul's stamp collection is still safe in my linen closet. I decided not to put the albums back in the mahogany box. The box, though polished, still holds a memory of betrayal I don't care to see every day. It's a symbol now, a reminder that even the most beautiful things can be empty inside. Most of the items that were sold are gone for good. My grandmother's silver tea set, the Meissen figurines, the oil paintings. They've drifted into new homes, new lives. The escrow account still regularly receives Jessica's paycheck, and that money covers their appraised value, a number on a ledger. But I know some things can never be bought back. I've learned to accept that loss as the price of a hard-won lesson. Mike and Jessica's relationship, surprisingly, did not break. But it's not the same. It transformed. Like a tree struck by lightning, it didn't die, but it grew back in a different shape, gnarled, twisted, but perhaps, in its own way, stronger. The glitter and phoniness have completely vanished from my daughter-in-law. Jessica is a quiet woman now. She still works at the department store. She was promoted to a department manager. She learned the value of earning her own way. There are no more extravagant shopping sprees, no more boasts on social media. Sometimes on weekends I see her in the kitchen, trying to follow my old recipes. Her cooking is still clumsy, but there's an earnestness to it that never existed before. We will never be close friends. The chasm created by her betrayal is too wide to ever fully bridge, but we have reached a quiet understanding, a cool respect. She respects me and this house as a condition of her existence here, and I, in turn, respect her effort at restitution, even though I suspect it was born more from fear than from true remorse. Mike has changed the most. My son lost his innocence that night. He no longer blindly trusts in appearances. He's quieter, more thoughtful. He spends more time at home, fixing things himself, tending the garden chores he once left entirely to me. He and I can now sit for hours in comfortable silence, finding solace in each other's presence. We found our way back to each other, not as mother and young son, but as two adults who weathered a storm together and survived. Our bond is rebuilt on a foundation of hard truth, and because of that, it's stronger than ever. 5 years on, Jessica has paid back about half of her debt. Her road is still long. Sometimes I see her standing alone in front of the grandfather clock, just watching the pendulum swing. I wonder what she thinks about. Maybe she's thinking about the time she lost, or maybe she's thinking about the time she has left to make things right. And me? I have what I wanted: peace, respect, and most importantly, I found myself again. I am no longer a ghost in my own home. I travel more, I've joined a book club, and I've even started writing down the local history of our little town. As I sit here now, in my library, listening to that familiar ticking, I reflect on it all. I've learned a few things. I learned that silence is a double-edged sword. There is the silence of forbearance, a toxic silence that erodes your dignity and breeds contempt. But there is also the silence of strength, the silence of observing, waiting, and choosing your moment. Knowing when to break the silence is one of the wisest lessons life has taught me. I learned that family is not always a safe harbor. Sometimes it's a battlefield where the most brutal wars are fought not with swords, but with words, actions, and silence. And in those battles, you have to fight for your boundaries, for your self-respect, or you will be consumed. Love does not mean unconditional sacrifice. True love must be accompanied by respect. Otherwise, it's just a form of control in disguise. And finally, I learned about the nature of legacy. A legacy isn't the things we leave behind. The clocks, the tea sets, the paintings, they are merely vessels for memory. The true legacy is in the stories we tell, the values we instill, and the lessons we teach the next generation. By fighting to protect those objects, I wasn't just reclaiming property. I was teaching my son and my daughter-in-law a lesson about honesty, accountability, and the cost of betrayal. That is the true legacy I want to leave behind. The clock begins to chime. It's time for afternoon tea. Life goes on, as rhythmic and steady as that pendulum. There are losses and sorrows, but there is also peace and a new, hard-won wisdom. And for a woman who has seen more than 6 decades of life, that is perhaps all one can ask for. If this story touches your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel to listen to more meaningful life stories with us. Your support is our biggest motivation to keep sharing. Thank you for listening to the whole story. If you are connected with it, please like, share, and subscribe. Also, drop a comment below with your thoughts or your own story. Let's keep the empathy and sharing going.